Hey, what's up, Isolation Nation? Welcome back to the daily Jase live show. It's my honor and privilege to introduce a very special friend. She's a neonatal intensive care unit specialist and adventure extraordinaire. Welcome to the stage, Ashley. How
Hi,
are you, Ash?
guys. I'm doing great. Thanks for having me, Jason.
No, it's good to have you here. How's things in Colorado?
Good. I mean, overall, it's interesting because a lot of the mountain towns have started to put in some more restrictions, like towing cars at trailheads and things like that. But our
Oh, really?
caseload, yeah. But our new cases has kind of flattened out over the last week. So that's awesome.
Oh, that's good. Yeah, for all the people out there who may not know you, just give a quick five of what you're all about, where you've come from, what your story is, so that they have a bit of background into who you are.
Yeah, definitely. So I grew up in the States. I was born and raised in Texas, and then kind of went to the East Coast for school for a bit and lived outside of Washington, D.C. and all the hustle and bustle and politics of life. And I'm a nurse by training. And so, like Jason said, I have a neonatal background and then now work in a pediatric cardiac ICU. And I have done a lot of travel and volunteer abroad. Lived in New Zealand for 6 months and now live in Denver, Colorado, which is right outside the Rocky Mountain range. So I spend in my free time a lot of time out in the mountains climbing peaks that are over, I have to convert them into meters, but like 14,000 feet. So it's a lot of fun.
So you're pretty much in your natural habitat in Colorado. That's where you hang out. You love nature.
Yeah, awesome. Pretty much.
So I brought you on because you probably have a special perspective into this whole situation. You understand the medical side of it. You're seeing what's happening in America. You sort of know what's going on in New Zealand just by the news, and you lived here for 6 months. So what's the sort of feeling over there in hospitals and just in general public?
Yeah, I think it very much varies depending on where you are in the United States. So definitely, I've talked to multiple friends in New York, and they are definitely like in a state of like almost complete lockdown and a little bit of like scared and afraid just because New York has blown up so much. Where
yeah,
other
it's pretty
parts,
scary over there.
Yeah, I know, it's insane. Where other parts of the U.S., like different areas, like a little bit more of the South has taken it a little bit less seriously. So they're not as scared or as fearful. And then there's states that are kind of like in between, like Colorado and California and Oregon, who have really taken it seriously, put in a lot of restrictions in on the earlier side. And so it's just kind of more of like a healthy fear, I think, in those states where resources aren't quite as limited as a place like New York.
And when you say restrictions, what does that look like, the places that have put more intense restrictions?
Yeah, so I think it just looks at like there's such a variety of timelines across the US in terms of like lockdowns, for example, or like in some places in some places and counties are doing it like countywide. So they're doing like kind of like I was saying, like towing at trailheads or fining any non-local who is staying in that county for even being there versus like especially in Colorado, we have a lot of backcountry skiers. And so they're still getting out and these counties with really small mountain towns are very scared and rightfully so. So it's anything from like complete lockdown to whatever the restrictions are. And there's just a huge variety across the whole US in those.
Yeah. And unlike here where we're locked in with water, obviously the US has, there's just so much land and people can travel back and forth between the states. Is there restrictions from state to state travel, or how are they stopping people? Is there vehicle checkpoints where they turn people around? Obviously, like it's just such a big population to manage. What steps are the government or the states taking to stop people traveling, or if you're in, like, obviously if you're in a state with high lockdown restrictions, like they might be next to one where there is a little more relaxed behavior. So how are they managing that?
Yeah, so I think it definitely depends on the state. In America, we sometimes value our freedom a lot, sometimes to the
Yeah.
detriment of of the greater
Yes, you
good
do.
sometimes. And so I think there's definitely been like restrictions traveling to and from New York, for example, and like, but a lot of flights are still occurring or still happening, but they're not
Oh,
having
wow.
a lot of people on them. So it's
No matter
pretty.
which state they're going to or coming from.
Mhm. Correct.
Wow.
But they are in certain states, depending on it, like doing vehicle checkpoints. But it's once again, a huge variety. So, like, one of my coworkers was stopped twice, like one day after the other, and
Going
she
to
was
work.
literally going to work. Versus, like, I mean, I've driven a fair amount into the mountains, and I always go alone, and I haven't like stopped in any of the mountain towns. But like, I have never been stopped. But there's definitely more like police out there, and it's like at their discretion to stop people. I think it's just hard to, I mean, it's just hard to like know who's a local versus a non-local. But within, like, for example, when Denver first started putting in their lockdown and kind of enforcing it, there were over like 2,000 stops and over like
Oh,
500
wow.
citations. So it definitely depends on the city, it depends on the county, and kind of goes from there.
And is there a timeline of how long these restrictions will last? Or does that vary from state to state as well?
So President Trump has kind of recommended that it goes till April 30th. Um, Colorado's is currently April 26th. The state of Virginia, for example, is going till June 10th
Okay.
already.
Yeah, wow.
So
Yeah,
there's a huge variety.
because in New Zealand we're at like the 2.5 week point, where we've been in full lockdown, and then the time that we come out of lockdown is 4 weeks. So, but that may get extended. So we have 4 levels here, and
Wow.
we're currently at level 4. And then after those 4 weeks, we might go down to level 3 in some regions, or we might drop to level 2 or 1. That announcement is going to be made on the 20th of April. So
Wow.
there's still a little bit of uncertainty there, but yeah, it's pretty strict at the moment here. We've got to stay in what's called our bubbles, and we've got to make sure that we only go out for essentials, which is like the supermarket runs. If you need drugs from the pharmacy, you're allowed to do that. But apart from that, you're staying indoors. If you're going a bit crazy with cabin fever, you're allowed to go out for runs. But yeah, it's pretty strict over here at the moment. So yeah, there's a lot of people doing business online, obviously, but yeah, we're all getting itchy feet. I suppose it's similar over there for a lot of people.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think it's really interesting that you guys have the levels, and I think that's going to be really helpful when you start reopening things. I think one thing the US is really going to struggle with is how do we like slow, and I think China as well has struggled a little bit with like how do we slowly lift restrictions. Um,
Yeah. Oh,
so I
so
think,
it's like a light switch, either you're on or you're
yeah,
off.
yeah, very much in the US, where I feel like
Yeah.
having a level system is a little bit more helpful and probably going to be better in the long term than
Yeah,
just
for
reopening
sure.
everything.
What's going on in the hospitals at the moment? What's the
Yeah.
feelings there?
So I think it's a matter of everyone's there's just definitely a level of stress, like added stress because we're not sure of. I think there's a lot of unpredictability in it. So it's luckily, so I'm a pediatric nurse, so I mostly work with kids, and it's definitely hitting the elderly adult population a lot harder. Um, and so like for us, like as a pediatric hospital, we're right now, and so we've opened up space to take adults if we need to, but that hasn't quite happened yet. The adult hospitals in our region are managing COVID reasonably well. I think the biggest thing that overall, like as a whole, everyone's kind of struggling with America is how do we ration our PPE and how do we do
Hmm.
that well? And what does that look like? And what systems can we create in place to do this? Because no matter where you are, you're going to have a shortage if you're not already experiencing one now.
Yeah, yeah. And
So I think that's kind of the overall feeling.
is there enough tests and testing kits over there? Or it's mainly PPE?
Yeah, I think
that's
it
the
depends
problem?
on the state. I think it depends on the hospital. So like for example, like we're at my hospital, we're doing all of our tests in-house. And so we are able to like have enough tests for everyone and that we want to do. Some of our patients recently who and we just started doing it too, who has struggled with respiratory issues and is on full life support. We just put her on full life support recently, but she's tested negative for COVID twice. But then we've tested her a third time just in case that she ended up having it. So we definitely have enough tests, but I think it varies throughout the region essentially. And it depends on whether a hospital is doing it in-house or like subcontracting it out.
Yeah, and does it vary between, I guess, socioeconomic regions? Like poorer populations may not get the resources they need, and wealthier areas are better resourced, or are they're actually allocating based on need rather than status?
I think they're definitely allocating more on need. I think there's more
That's
of a
good.
discrepancy and a distinction between rural versus urban. So like the
Okay.
rural
Yep, that
areas
makes sense.
don't necessarily like have ICUs or ventilators or things like that, and the bigger cities do. So just getting them access to tests, but also getting their patients who are very sick, like access and transferred to a hospital with those resources.
Yeah, yeah. What are places like New York doing? Like the ones that have been hit hardest. What measures are they taking? How are they managing the workload? Obviously, they've got a massive crisis on their hands. What are they doing on the ground that you hear
Yeah.
of?
Yeah. Actually, one of my best friends is going to start working in New York within the next
Oh
week.
wow! Are they calling in
Um,
medical workers to jump over there and help out from
so
other
they've had
states?
over, yeah, so they have. So they've had over. So it's interesting. So there's what you call traveling nurses who have flexible positions, and so a lot of travelers have gone to New York to work. New York is paying their nurses like astronomical amounts um, to work. The city of New York has also, and the state overall has asked for volunteers, and there's over like 22,000 people that have volunteered.
Oh wow,
Um,
that's massive.
yeah, massive. So it's a matter of, I think right now the system's a little stressed and like sorting through all those people and trying to get them connected to the right place and getting them set up with jobs and whatnot. So I think that's been helpful. And then the federal government, like on like the President Trump has really sent a lot of resources to New York. And they're just trying to like open up hospitals, whether that's, in various like arenas or other spaces that aren't necessarily like hospital based. And then like all the hotels in New York are pretty empty, as you can imagine. So they're putting up a lot of like medical professionals there as well. So it's just kind of a joint like community effort, I feel like, in New York to just kind of like stay ahead of the curve. I think what's helpful is like we very much have like the resources and the capacity of the entire United States of America versus Italy is such a much smaller country. And when one region's hit hard, like you can have volunteers, but you're not going to have this like endless pool. Where in the United States, like there is almost an endless pool of human resources.
Yeah, which is good in situations like these, but also it comes at a detriment if someone becomes infected and takes it back to their communities, right?
Correct.
Yeah. What is the I suppose I saw on the news today that the US just overtook Italy in the number of cases.
Mm-hmm.
Is that curve flattening out a little bit in the States, or is it continuing to rise? And they're trying to manage the situation.
Yeah, I think it's just like just recently starting to flatten, like barely. And so we're not out of the woods by any means. And there's still a lot of unknowns, but we're at least like progressing in the right direction. Like so recently New York has still had like a significant death toll, but their new cases are slowly creeping down.
That's good.
So
Yeah.
yes.
Awesome. And what's your predictions for what's going to develop in the States in the next month or two? Obviously, there's a lot of unknowns, or how like different states can manage it. But personal thoughts and predictions. What's 2 months down the line look like? What does 6 months down the line look like?
I think kind of like I was mentioning earlier with your guys' like 4 levels of, lockdown or quarantine. I think the US is really going to struggle once we start opening things up. And I think we might even see a surge in cases after that. And so I think that's going to be difficult to manage, is how do we slowly open up while maintaining our economy or restarting the economy. So I think if we can keep in our progression that we have and keep flattening that curve and really decreasing it, I think then we're going to be in an okay spot and a really good spot. Eventually, I think it's just going to take time. So
we got a comment from Fred. Someone thought you were Jacinda.
Oh my gosh, that's awesome.
Yeah, I'll get Jacinda on the show soon. I've just got to work my way up. But take that as a compliment.
That's awesome.
So good. Hey, Fred, hope you're doing well in the cooks.
Yeah.
You know Fred.
Yeah,
don't you?
Definitely. Yeah, I do, for sure. Hopefully he's doing so well.
Yeah, one day the cooks are managing all this.
Yeah.
Like those island nations.
Curious. Yeah. I'd be very
curious. They probably haven't been hit as hard as the rest of the world if they shut their borders off earlier, right?
Yeah. Hopefully they just have like a few cases and not like extensive.
Like New Zealand, they can shut everyone out pretty quickly and easily and manage the situation,
Yes. Where in the US, that's very hard to do.
Yeah, and Europe, everyone's traveling between the places. It's going to be so interesting what international travel looks like 6 months down the line, before we have a vaccine, before we know if countries have completely eradicated everything that's gone on. Will the states have interstate travel like a month down the line, like just open everything up and make sure that once a few states have become corona free, or they're managing the situation? Obviously there's an economic balance that's happening in the background, where if they lock down countries for too long, like people will be hit hard financially. What's the thoughts on the ground at the moment in the States?
Yeah, I definitely think so. I think one of the big things that has really played a lot in the news in the States is unemployment. So the federal government is injecting a lot of money into unemployment checks and things like that. And so I think, several, like my sister is a bartender and the other's a waitress, and I have several bartending friends. And so, those are the workers that are really hit hard right now, but they're able to, at least for right now, like be sustained on unemployment checks that are basically covering your rent and cost of food for right now. Not really anything extra, but being able to get by. And so I think the challenge is, in some places, will those jobs still exist if this keeps going on? Are those, a lot of the restaurant industry has such a slim market already that any stressor just puts them under. And the other question is how long. So typically unemployment in the US, it depends very much state by state, but usually only goes for 6 months, depending on the state. The federal government has increased it for up to 26 weeks, like legally, but it's state dependent.
Do you mean that benefit that you can receive, mm-hmm. you can only get it for 6 months? Oh, correct. Wow. So it's not ongoing. If you're trying to find a job, there is a deadline.
Correct. So I think that will be interesting to see what happens if this continues long term. And I think that's what's challenging, is a lot of these people have unemployment, but if their businesses are no longer existing when we reopen in May or June, how are they going to be able to find work? They're going to have to essentially figure out or switch industries or learn new skills or whatever it is.
Yeah. There's been a couple of initiatives here where travel companies have talked to like Healthline, for example, and all those workers who were out of a job, they shifted, like the company shifted those employees straight over to another company. So, but that takes leadership at the management level and their contacts to see what they can arrange. So it's on a case-by-case basis, depending on what company you're in. It's not at a government level per se. So it'll be interesting to see how everyone manages this situation. And yeah, unemployment obviously is a burden on everyone. It's a burden on an individual level and a societal level.
Definitely.
But it's interesting to see how each country will deal with it.
Yeah.
You know,
and that's awesome to hear that company just like flipped. That's amazing.
Yeah. I think it was like 2,000 workers.
Wow.
So yeah, it's awesome. Like that seems pretty small on an American level, but on a New Zealand level, like it's pretty amazing. It means that 2,000 people don't have to worry about how they're going to pay their rent or feed their kids. And like in the US, there's been a massive cash injection from the government here. Their first announcement was for $12 billion, which was the biggest benefit package in our lifetimes ever handed out. And I think they said that there might be adjustments to that. I think there was an adjustment, but I'm not too sure on the details there where they increased it. But obviously, businesses had to apply to get some of that cash and pass it around their employees and manage that side of it. So there's a bit of admin in the background, but that was put up very quickly onto government websites, and people could apply for it pretty easily and quickly. Obviously, we're putting the economic issue on hold for the minute, just while we deal with the health issue. But yeah, there's definitely that backlash to come economically, and we've got to find strategic ways to manage that, like the rest of the world,
Yeah.
It's going to be interesting times for sure.
Yeah.
Is America thinking about closing its borders for international travel?
Yeah, and it has.
I know they did that earlier a little bit.
Yeah, definitely. Like our borders are closed with Mexico and Canada currently as well, and
China,
travel, and international,
and Europe,
and international. Yeah.
Oh, everywhere.
Yeah.
Wow. Interesting. Is there a sign of when that might open again?
I think definitely not until and I think there's still some vital or essential international travel happening. I don't think it's completely shut down from that perspective. I think there's still some, but
getting
I think
supplies from other countries.
Tourists, yeah, and stuff like that. But it won't be until after April 30th, because that's just at least for right now, when Trump from the federal level has recommended that everyone kind of have a lockdown of sorts.
Yeah. What's the feeling over there around how Trump is commenting on the whole situation, or the news he's spreading? Because we sort of get this perspective from New Zealand that he says things that are a bit abrupt, or fake news or fake science. Obviously you're on the ground there. He probably has a lot of followers. That's how he got elected and such. What's the feeling around him?
Yeah. I definitely think it depends. I think there's overall a lot of thoughts that he didn't handle it from the beginning well. He was kind of not. But I think now, generally speaking, I think and I think people could still critique how he's handling it now, but I think generally speaking, it's in a better direction. And he's at least enlisted some people who are very intelligent in certain ways, some of the medical community, to really help manage this. And I think he's acknowledged it's a crisis and that he can't solve it himself. And so I think that's helpful. And I still think there's definitely critiques of overall of his management, especially how quickly he acted or didn't act. And so I think it's really interesting too. Something that's kind of in the background in American sentiment is what does this do for his reelection?
So
and
it's
I
him
think
and Joe
that's
Biden, they're the most likely candidates, yeah?
yeah.
When's the election over there? Is it September or
It's going to
October?
be in November.
November, that's right. And yeah, that's full steam ahead, I suppose, at this point.
Yeah. So
Everyone will have to hit the polling booth.
Yeah, well, there's been some discussion around doing like kind of like virtual ballots or something that people don't actually have to go to the polls, which will be interesting to see what plays out with coronavirus and if that actually comes in like some paper ballots, for example, that are mailed to you or whatever it looks like. But we'll see what happens. And so, yeah, I think Bernie Sanders just dropped out of the race.
Yeah, I saw that
recently. And so I think, yeah, so just I think a lot of people, depending on a lot of Trump supporters, feel as if this is like a very political issue. And I think there's definitely an American sentiment that this is a very political issue of like people are out to get Trump or, like, is this something he created or, whatever it is. I definitely think there's some people who are making not just this like a communal effort against like a pandemic and a disease, but like a kind of political issue as well, depending on where you live or your political beliefs.
Yeah, it's interesting that's happening over in the States because New Zealanders they take the opposite view. We all of the politicians at the moment, they say, okay, let's put politics on hold. We've got a situation on our hands. Let's deal with this as best as possible, and let's readdress politics when we come out of it. And so it's quite unique it's just it's almost comical to see what's happening in the States, that people are making it into a political situation. Can't we just be adults, see it for what it is, get through it? It doesn't need to be politicized. It's unreal to see that happening on the other side of the world to a lot of Kiwis.
Yes, and America did general, and I think that's what's hard is because we're all so opinionated, and like some of the media is opinionated just as we are as opinionated, and so they're going to be very much like oh no, like Trump is handling us the worst thing ever, and like yada yada yada, and then other people are going to be like no, like he is our hero in these times, and there's not really, and I think with the media being such a strong presence in the US, and especially since we're all in lockdown, it's kind of tough to find. There's less fake news necessarily in regards to coronavirus than like during Trump's election. There was a lot of fake news on Facebook and things like that. And I think but there's, regardless of your opinion on Trump, you can read an article that will support your opinion. And there you can find a media outlet that will support your opinion. And so I think it's just tough to bridge that gap sometimes, because even during coronavirus, there's less middle ground than other countries like New Zealand or in Europe. We're very stratified in terms of our political opinions.
Yeah, we're so on the fence a lot of the time. We just say, okay, let's deal with this problem. There's a problem, we'll fix it. But when it comes to big picture stuff, whether we're right or left, you'll of course have those personalities that hang out on the extremes. But our government, for example, National, they're centre right, Labour, they're centre left. They're our main political parties. They're always going to hang around the centre, because as soon as someone says something too controversial, people won't stand behind them. That's just the way New Zealand is.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting.
Go on.
No, I think it's interesting because, like, when you look at American voters, most of the population is in the middle.
Really?
And so it's whatever. Yeah, so it's whatever political party can kind of sway the middle is who's going to win the election. But the problem is the middle is not valued, and the middle is in terms of like having a political opinion. It's the extremes that do the talking and run the show. And so it's listening to the extremes and trying to find the middle ground or whatnot. And as kind of like American politics have developed, I think we've, over the last couple of years, in terms of like different policies, like we've moved further and further from the middle ground, even though the voters are still there. And so those populations that were on the outside that were more of the extreme have grown because some of that middle ground has moved because they like don't feel like there can be compromise, or they feel like unjust or a loss of jobs or whatever it is, has really moved even more people to the extremes.
Whoever shouts loudest is generally the ones that are heard, even though the ones in the middle are the majority.
Correct.
What's
so true.
What's your predictions on the elections? Do you think Joe or Trump will come out on top?
I think it's going to be a very, very close election. And I think even polls have said it's very much split, almost 50-50 at this present moment. I think what's interesting, as I was just reading an article, that Barack Obama has been very quiet during all of this election time. And he said he was not going to like essentially give support to anybody until like the Democratic Party was united. And so the Democratic Party is essentially united right now. And so I think that's going to be really interesting, and an interesting factor to have him back on the scene, and him kind of whatever his opinion is or whatnot. So I think it's going to be a very close election. I think it's going to also depend on how Trump handles reopening and handles the economy afterwards, right? Like if the economy tanks after coronavirus, I think he's going to lose if he's not able to maintain like and the economy, and we're going to have like a significant economic recession, because that's just how America works. We like, if the world is okay and our lives are okay, we're like, yeah, we'll like reelect them essentially. But if our country is in shambles, we, just looking back on history, we generally don't reelect them. And the only exception to that is like FDR, but he was just doing such a great job of like running America through World War II that he was just reelected and reelected. So
yeah, Obama's such a cool guy. Like he's just hanging out in the background. Obama, he's just hanging in the shadows, seeing what unfolds, making sure that everyone's united on the front once they do pick a candidate, which it's Joe Biden now. And he's seeing how coronavirus develops, and he'll put his thoughts out there once everything just dies down a little bit and everyone's got a little bit of a clearer head. He's a cool guy. I think he's quite a soothing voice for America, because everyone else is shouting and displaying their views on media and on politics, and then he comes in, yes we can, he's that guy.
Yes. So I think that's going to be a very interesting factor coming in, and I think that's going to be really interesting to see what Barack Obama does in terms of, I mean, I'm assuming he's going to support Biden and whatnot, but like we don't know quite yet. And so I think that's going to be really interesting. And I think the challenge was in the last re-election is the Democratic Party was not united by any means. I mean, Hillary Clinton was definitely like, their pick and won the primaries, but like the party was still in so much dissent. It's going to be really interesting to see. I think it's hard to predict what is the power of the Democratic Party once it's united, because it has not been united in a few, almost 4 or 5 years.
Yeah. And I don't think that we can underestimate Trump. Like everyone knows that
Correct.
He's a pretty savvy dude. He got elected in the last election, and I think that surprised a lot of the world, but he definitely knows how to play the media, play the people. He knows how to pull strings. He's got a lot of supporters, obviously. A lot of people
Correct.
love him. So yeah, it'll be another it'll be an interesting election to watch and see from abroad. Obviously, has huge implications for the world.
I think what's going to be really interesting is the debates. I am very interested to see Trump and Joe Biden debate each other. I think that is going to be a very interesting experience.
Yeah.
Because I don't know that Trump obviously did not like Clinton at all. Like, you could even maybe say the word hate, but I don't know if he like, you can't really hate like Joe Biden. You know what I'm saying? Like, so I think that's just going to be really interesting to see those debates of Joe Biden and Trump together.
Yeah. They're both very smart people, obviously, and they know how politics works now. So,
yeah.
Who do you think is better at debating out of the two of them?
What'd you say?
Who do you think is better at debating? Like, can sway the American
probably
people?
Joe Biden for sure. I don't know. I mean, I think Trump is talking about just so vocal and so abrupt, and I just am very curious to see how. And I think that's what was similar is when you watched, Clinton and Trump debate. Like Clinton is, she is a tough woman and an impressive woman, and she lays down the law. She handled, I think, in some respects, but I think it's going to be very interesting because these are two men that have, run a country, run the most powerful country in the world. Like, yes, Joe Biden was vice president, but like he knows what he's talking about. He is not somebody who's, Joe Smo from the street who like doesn't fully understand the problems and intricacies. Trump does as well. And so I think it's going to be a very interesting match to see these two, like you said, very smart, very successful men try to convince the middle ground of America who's the better candidate.
Yeah. It's what do you think the top subjects for these elections will be? Obviously, coronavirus is one of them. Is there anything on everyone's heads in America other than coronavirus? I suppose the economy.
Yes.
Or will it just be the usual sort of debates around pro-life, pro-choice, that sort of thing?
I think it'll definitely be some of the usual too. I think what will be interesting too, and I think coronavirus has kind of eclipsed this in a lot of ways, is how these candidates kind of handle some of the more social issues, such as, disparity, generally speaking, but also like more nuanced stuff of like the Me Too movement and how do you deal with women and how do you deal with the Black community or the immigrant community within the U.S. and what does the immigrant rights look like? And I think those are very much on the forefront of American thought, kind of a little bit when Trump was getting elected, but very much of all this disparity within the Black community that still exists today. And so I think that's going to be a very interesting issue to discuss, and I think an important one of how do we handle women, immigrants, and minorities.
Yeah, absolutely. We've got a question from the crowd, from Campbell Nelson. He says, do you think the debates and voting will be postponed as COVID-19 seems to be still very present in the US? Thanks, Campbell. Hope you're doing well, mate.
I think that's such a great question. I think it's too early to tell. I think if coronavirus and we still have lockdown, I think the debates will happen regardless. I mean, I think there might be some varying form of, Trump and Joe Biden on a webcam, maybe. But I think that the presidential debates are just such an important aspect of American politics and have been since the beginning of, American politics, especially once, in the 60s and 50s, once television started to become a thing. And so I think those are very important. And so I think they will still happen. I cannot foresee America like putting off the voting process or those debates, but I can see them being transformed in different forms, whether that's, like I was kind of mentioning earlier, paper ballots or whatever it is.
Yeah, they're massive, That's part of your guys' culture,
Yes.
Debates and rallies.
Yes.
They're huge.
Yes.
You guys love getting in a crowd and getting into a room and arguing over the big topics.
No, for sure. And I think you're 100% right, Jason. And I think, so I don't foresee us, I mean, I would just be like massive chaos, I feel like, in the US and a lot of dissent if the voting process, if the voting process is put off like a week to 2 weeks, okay, maybe. But if it's like, I do not project that it will be put off like till next year or the next. Like that's just, our election day has been the same election day for the last, 100 years.
And it's still 7 months down the line, we've still
Correct.
got time, the situation will look a whole lot different nationally,
Correct.
internationally. So a lot can change. And hopefully the curve will come down dramatically by then. If it hasn't, then we've got bigger problems to deal with, right?
Yes. And if we look, at countries like China, for example, that have really decreased their caseload within a lockdown since like January 26th, you know what I'm saying? And they're just restarting to open up. That's a period of, almost 2.5 months. It's not 6, it's not 7, it's not 9. So I think that's promising, despite, whatever you want to think about the data coming from China, but I think that is at least promising. So hopefully we can follow suit in the US.
Shout out to my uncle. He's very involved in local politics. He's a councillor down in Wellington. So
that's awesome.
Yeah, he's loving what you have to say. It's hope everything's good at home, Uncle Si. Good to see you following the show. Just a few last thoughts. What are you going to do post all this blows over? Have you got a bucket list lined up? Something more positive?
No, yeah. So I think, two things that I'm kind of working on is, one, I just cannot wait to the weather has been so nice in Denver to get all the friends together and sit up on a rooftop bar and just sit back, hang out, and drink a nice cocktail. I think that's going to be awesome. The other personal goal that I'm working on is, so kind of a weird hobby of mine is in Colorado, there's 58 peaks over 14,000 feet. And so my goal, and so people usually hike all of these. So I'm still working on it. Like I said, I'm still going in the mountains, trying to be as safe as possible. But I'm going to try to finish all the 14ers, like we like to call them, this summer. So that's my big goal for the summer. It's going to be, and I'm still working on that list, but I'm waiting for the snow to melt a little bit more and some of the peaks that are currently have a high avalanche danger to get a little bit safer. So you'll just find me out on the mountains as usual. Nothing crazy.
Hiking. Yep. Doing your thing. Getting lost in the mountains.
Yeah.
Awesome, Ashley.
Yeah.
Thanks so much for jumping on the show. You're doing amazing.
Yeah.
Jumping into hospitals and saving babies and kids. It's pretty amazing what you do. Thanks for giving your insight into what's happening in America. Obviously quite a different kettle of fish from here in New Zealand, but hope that everything turns out okay for America and see what happens in the elections.
Definitely.
We'll be having cocktails with our friends soon enough.
No, thank you so much, Jason. And I wish the best for all of New Zealand, for sure. It's such a special, wonderful country. So
no worries, Ashley.
I hope you guys
we'll have you over
going.
here soon, hopefully. Once the borders reopen.
Fingers crossed.
Exactly.
Yeah,
all right.
No, definitely.
See you, Ashley.
Thanks, Jason.
Bye.
All right. Bye.